Welcome to the Underline This podcast where we unpack the big ideas and the margins because the best parts, they're between the lines. We have an exciting episode coming up today. We're going to be looking at the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. Like with most of our shows, we're going to do an introduction to the book and author. We'll talk about key themes and takeaways, which we're going to blend in quotes into that as well. We'll talk about hot takes. I'll give you my final rating and thoughts. We'll go from there. To kick things off, let's talk about Don Miguel Ruiz. So Don Miguel Ruiz was born in 1952. He's still alive, and he was born in Tijuana. He was actually the youngest of 13 children, which I can't even imagine what that would be like, having Sunday dinner or just being surrounded with so many siblings. Poor mom and poor dad. He is the author of a lot of Toltec spiritual and shamanistic texts. He specializes in the personal growth and self-help genre. He's considered a big influencer in the New Thought movement. Something I thought was interesting about Don Miguel Ruiz as well is that he attended medical school and he was actually a surgeon. I find it fascinating when you see authors who, maybe writing was something like a hobby. I think we were talking about Jurassic Park not too long ago with Michael Crichton, who was actually a doctor as well before becoming a well-known author and director. Some of the works that Don Miguel Ruiz has written are the 4 Agreements, The Mastery of Love, The Voice of Knowledge, The Circle of Fire, Fifth Agreement, and The Toltec Art of Life and Death. So that's our first author. Now, I do think it's worth mentioning our second author, which was a big influence for the 4 Agreements, and that would be the Toltecs. Now, I'm a lover of history, so I love diving into some of these different cultures and civilizations that existed long before us. So let's talk about the Toltecs. They are a Mesoamerican people in central Mexico from the 10th to the 12th centuries. They existed after the decline of the Mayans and before the rise of the Aztecs. I do think it's worth Googling the Toltecs and just looking at some of their architecture and culture because it really is fascinating. They are famous for architecture and stone carvings. One of the things I think I remember seeing, I Googled it later on, is the serpent columns. And they were also known for their militaristic society, their conquests in the neighboring regions, because that's shown very much in their art. They also are the ones that believed in a deity called Quetzalcoatl, and they had their own very complex religious system. So I wanted to talk about the 2 different authors because Don Miguel Ruiz wrote this book as a result of his love for the Toltecs and their spiritual belief systems. Let's talk about the book. So it was published in 1997. 15 million copies have been sold today. It's been published in 53 languages. And it, of course, was inspired by the Toltec spiritual beliefs. And a lot of the themes that come from this book are centered around love and freedom and happiness. Not necessarily the focus of that, but really those are the promised results from living up to these 4 agreements and how we go about honoring those. And so that brings us to the main idea, which is that our lives are determined, according to Ruiz, by 4 agreements. These are agreements that we make with the universe. When I say the universe, I use that term, the universe, as like an umbrella term for agreements that we make with ourselves, others, and God. And based on that agreement is how we measure our self-worth and how we behave. So these 4 agreements are very influential. Now, let's talk about the key themes. So I mentioned before that it's based on how we live those 4 agreements that will achieve happiness, freedom, love. So what are those 4 agreements? They are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, always do your best. Let's unpack these, starting with the first agreement, which is be impeccable with your word. You've heard the expression, your word is your bond. That is absolutely true. Our words, when they align with our actions, build up what I like to think of as integrity capital. When you do what you say, your stock goes up. And when you don't do what you say, your stock goes down. And a lot of that plays into our interactions with ourselves. So when we say we're going to do something but we don't do it, that changes how we perceive ourselves. Also, the same goes for when we're speaking with other people. When we say we're going to do something and we neglect it, then our stock goes down. So when we speak, we should speak with purpose and recognize that our word is our bond with ourself and the universe, and that there is power in our words. So going along with the theme of words equal power, it's not necessarily just when it comes to integrity, capital, but also creating or destroying. So when we use our words to create, we can inspire, we can give knowledge, wisdom, information, we can create love, happiness, we can persuade people for good. That's the creation aspect of our words and the power that they have. Now, on the flip side, there's destroying, and that would essentially kind of be like the negative, the negative aspect of using our words. So we could use our words instead of to uplift and empower, we use it for harm, for criticizing, for manipulating, for damaging those around us, for spreading lies. So our words very much are like a tool that can be used for good, or it can be used for causing harm. And I love there's another quote, I'm full of quotes, but one of my big takeaways from this agreement comes from Uncle Ben, who said, and again, let me actually take 2 steps back, so bear with me. Uncle Ben is Spider-Man's uncle, for those of you that live under a rock. And Uncle Ben, in the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, says, with great power, Peter, comes great responsibility. Now, I like to take that and kind of flip it around a little bit, do a little bit of wordsmithing, and say, with great responsibility comes great power. The big takeaway from this agreement is that we need to recognize that our voice holds tremendous weight. And when we speak to ourselves and the world, that is going to have an influence for good or for bad. And words really are one of the most powerful life tools that we've been given. And we need to be responsible with it. One of the quotes that I really like from the 4 agreements is this: your word is the power to create. It is a gift. And an invitation that Ruiz gives us is for us to use the power of your word in the direction of truth and love. On to the next one. Number 2 for the second agreements. Don't take anything personally. Another quote that I love, my wife and I always joke around with this when maybe one of us is feeling a bit too fragile, and that is, your ego is not your amigo, which is also very fitting because we're talking about the Toltecs. So this is a Mesoamerican group, so I think that's a fitting quote. Let's talk about taking things personally. This all comes down to our pride or our ego and keeping it at a healthy balance. Pride and ego is important to have because it influences our confidence, but we don't want it to spill over. So when we don't take things personally, we develop thick skin. We minimize the amount of targets that others might have for us. And we recognize when it's appropriate for us to stand up for ourselves, maybe to ignore the criticisms of other people, or maybe even find the truth in it, and whether or not we should engage in conflict. And as I mentioned before, pride is one of the easiest targets for someone that's trying to rattle you, or maybe an enemy or a critic. And that's why when you can learn to take or not to take things personally, we develop humility, which really acts as that layer of skin to realize that we don't have to fight every battle. We don't necessarily need to trust everything that is said about us. It's about keeping ourselves in check. So I just want to mention that when you think of someone who's strong, a leader, usually they're someone who checks all these boxes. They're humble, they're teachable, they learn. And when you think of someone who's weak, typically it's someone with very thick skin, they're fragile, and they're someone that's easily bothered by the things that people say, or maybe they overthink about it. They give real estate to their mind to other people and what they have to say, especially when it's maybe people we don't know that well. So we need to realize that we need to control the controllable, and that is that we don't have to take things personally. What others say, what other people say and do, really is a reflection on them and not you. And why, by controlling how we respond, we're controlling the controllable. So recognize that, and there will be a new superpower. And the quote I really like here from Ruiz in the book is, when you are immune to the opinions and actions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering. I said that that's a superpower, and that really is. Let's talk about the next one. Don't make assumptions. This is going to sound very cliche, but I've held on to this idea for a very, very long time. I remember in 7th grade algebra, I walked into class and there was some sort of conflict going on between a student and the teacher. And he basically pointed out to the student that the student was assuming that he was going to be lenient with him when he wasn't putting in the effort to do homework. I remember in front of everyone, he wrote down on the board and warned us about making assumptions. And he said, when you assume, you make a ASS, and then he did add a space, a U, the letter U, space, me. So the quote is, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. And I think that is very true. Just one of those very simple life lessons that we can take with us. And when we do make assumptions, as a result, we have more stress. I feel like things become more chaotic. There's more issues. I'm a project manager. And when we assume things are clear, or we assume people know what they're supposed to be doing, or we assume people understand, then there's, again, chaos, there's misunderstanding. And just by clearing up that risk of assumptions, or I guess, let's look at it this way. We don't want to assume. So in order to counteract assumptions, we need to be inquisitive. We need to ask, and we need to communicate, and we need to check for understanding. And one of the quotes from this section that I really like says, the problem with assumptions is that we believe they are truth. And the invite that Ruiz gives us is, find the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want. I'm full of quotes today. I'll throw one out that just came to mind. There's another really great quote about how we live our lives, and it's, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And that comes down to not accepting what others' expectations are in you. And also, I should tie this back up to assumptions, not assuming that everyone's looking out for your best interests or that everyone is on the same wavelength as you, because that typically is not the case. Not to beat a dead horse, let's go on to the final and fourth agreement, which is always do your best. Going back to the idea of controlling the controllable. Circumstances change. Sometimes you have a good day, sometimes you're going to have a bad day. Sometimes you're healthy, sometimes you're sick. Sometimes you got all the support in the world, or sometimes you're on your own. What do we control? What is the one consistency despite living in a very dynamic world? That is doing our best. And that's our way of holding ourselves to a higher standard from getting the most out of life. And when we do that, we have a return in high dividends of confidence, self-respect, trust in ourselves, and we receive the trust from others. We become dependable. We get an increase of growth, because when we're trying to do our best, we learn. Sometimes we make what I like to call productive mistakes. Productive because they're a mistake that you're allowed to make it at that moment, and you remember, okay, well, I'm not going to make that again. And then in the categories where we do want to see a decrease, we'll see a decrease in regrets and judgment. Two quotes that I pulled for this are, one, under any circumstance, always do your best. No more, no less. Kind of has a similar theme to Yoda, do, right? Next one. Doing your best is taking the action because you love it, not because you are expecting a reward. And I just want to add another thought to that last quote, which is that when we do our best, again, the effort that you give and the attitude that you have going into a task is this. Or I guess there's that standard line, right? And when you're always trying to do your best, that line is only going to get better and better and better. And so that your natural abilities are going to be well above average if you're holding yourself to that high standard and always just doing everything that you can to give the best performance, whether it's in a relationship, it's working on a project, it's showing up to a competition, to a sport, or even just being there for a friend. All right, let's talk about takeaways from the 4 agreements. When I read this book, I look at the 4 agreements like spotlights, and they're shining a light for introspection, self-review. We may not even realize we made these agreements or how we're even behaving based on these agreements that we've made. But I think there's a lot of truth into recognizing that there are 4 agreements in life that really influence how we view ourselves, the world, and how we behave. And to continue running with this metaphor of spotlights being shown on us for introspection, many of us are acting blindly or in the dark, and that's no way to live. We don't want to be unaware. We don't want to be ignorant to how we behave and how we could be living. It's kind of like when you realize that you're not blind anymore, you can actually see where you're going, and you get a good look at those around you and even opportunities to grow and improve. And there's an excellent quote that I love, and this is just to summarize the main idea and going along the line of this theme of spotlights and not wanting to live blindly. There's a quote that Ruiz gives, which says, "We don't see the truth because we are blind. What blinds us are all those false beliefs we have in our mind." So again, it's almost like those false beliefs about ourselves and the outside world is the darkness. And the understanding that there are 4 agreements, or at least using these 4 agreements for self-reflection and discovery, it casts a spotlight for us. Next, let's talk about hot takes. This is a must-read book. I've read it minimum of 4 or 5 times. I've actually lost track. I know that I discovered it probably years and years ago, and I read it every year, if not once, sometimes twice, just because it's short and easy. If you listen to it on Audible, it's about an hour and 40 minutes, and the book itself is very manageable. You could probably read it in an afternoon. Although it is one of those, again, when I go back to talk about binge reading, I'm guilty of this, but I think it's almost better to read slowly, to take it in, to give yourself time to reflect and to think about what it is that you're digesting and to get all the nutrients you can from it. It's kind of like eating a big cake. If you had a nickel for every time I use this metaphor, you'd all be millionaires. But reading a rich book, rich with ideas, rich with content, it's like eating a cake. If you do so one piece at a time, it's gonna be very enjoyable. If you do it all at once, it's gonna leave a bad taste in your mouth and in your stomach. So don't recommend that. But this is a must read, especially for those of you that love personal development and self-help books. It's short, powerful, simple message, right? It's excellent. And so that being said, I give it 4.5 stars, which most books I read, I give a similar rating because I don't like reading books that are, to me, aren't necessarily a waste of time. I think reading is good, but I find that you're going to be speaking from personal experience, I'm much more likely to read and consistently read a book if it's something I'm excited about. And so that reduces the amount of friction to read. That's why I recommend it for you. In conclusion, I really don't know how authentic this is to quote Toltec spirituality, but the principles seem timeless and apply to all people, culture, and times. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a book similar to The Art of War, where it's just has ideas that have endured because they're so applicable regardless of who, where, when you are. And I'll be your tattoo artist to scribe the 4 agreements to your brain so that you can remember these. But I highly recommend just memorizing these and trying to apply them and see what comes from it. Again, I'm taking my metaphorical tattoo gun and put it on your brain. And the first one I'm going to inscribe is be impeccable with your word. Number 2, don't take things personally. Number 3, don't make assumptions. And number 4, always do your best. If you remember these and you continue to look at these 4 tattoos on your brain now, you're going to see these principles in action. You're going to see the benefits from them. And the benefits I've seen are that your integrity capital or stock will go up. Well, I'm using 2 different financial terms. We'll stick with capital. Your integrity capital will go up. You'll be able to, you'll develop a fire within you from living these that will help you inspire, lead, and guide those around you. And you'll also be able to bring warmth and joy to the world. Next, from living these principles, you avoid looking like an ass, which nobody wants to. And when I think of an ass, I think of Pinocchio. Do you remember the scene when there's a boy that becomes a donkey? That's what I think of. You don't want to look like that. Remember, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. So communicate. Don't accept lies as truth. Last positive result that you'll get from living these, and just again, this is from me, is that you'll become a high caliber performer in every facet of your life, whether you're wanting to show up as an exceptional partner, if you're wanting to show up as an exceptional parent, sibling, friend, worker, doing your best in all things. You'll find that standard will then trickle into all the different categories of your life. Now, if you want to continue to ride this wave of personal growth and development, I highly recommend checking out Mastery of Love by Don Miguel Ruiz, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, classic, A New Earth, also by Eckhart Tolle, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success by Deepak Chopra, The Alchemist by Paul Coelho, which is a millennial, which is probably one of the most read books by millennials. And then second to last, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. And one of my favorite books of all time, which I'm really looking forward to actually reading this and reviewing it again, is As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, who's one of the pioneers of the personal development and self-growth genre of books. Excellent read. You can actually find free versions online in PDF format. Now, in closing, I'd like to leave you with a quote that isn't from Don Miguel Ruiz, but also is in the same theme. And it comes from Viktor Frankl, who's the author of Man's Search for Meaning. For those of you that are not familiar with this book, it's written by a psychologist who spent time in Auschwitz. And the main idea from his experiences of going through really such a horror story is this. In his book, he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies growth and our freedom. If I were to take that quote along with the 4 agreements and boil it down into a refinery, what we would get in the end is agency. Agency for how we live up to those 4 agreements. Thank you very much for listening today. Please give us a follow on social media and wherever you get podcasts, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.